Hello and welcome, my friends. This is your host, Mario Lanzarotti. Welcome to the Zenpreneur podcast. I'm excited because today I get to interview a wonderful human being. Her name is Tina Greenbaum. She's the founder and CEO of Mastery Under Pressure, a management coaching program for high performing executives who need to refine and master their interpersonal and interdepartmental skills. Mastery Under Pressure gives CEOs and senior level managers the additional professional and personal tools to not only excel, but to empower their teams and their associates. As a licensed psychotherapist and professional sports psychology consultant, she gives high performing executives and business owners the skills they need to work within any corporate culture. That has made Tina a sought after speaker, a TEDx speaker, workshop leader, and a peak performance specialist. Now, I am super excited because Tina is going to help us level up through her presence, through her insights, and through the tools she's going to share with us. Tina, I'm excited. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mario. Every time I hear that resume, it's really, oh yeah, I've done all that. Put some stuff into this. Right.
It doesn't seem like that, right? Because you're going through your life and you're experiencing moment to moment. And oftentimes what I've seen is like, because I've done this work now over a decade, and I'm sure you have done that for even longer than that, it seems normal. It's like, oh, it's just how you live life. But for other people, it's a big thing. And so I'm curious to learn a little bit about your backstory, because usually people don't wake up one day and just say, you know what, I want to better myself and dedicate myself so I can make a difference in the world and help other people. How did you get to doing what you're doing today, Tina?
Well, I think one of the things that I remember years ago doing a conference, and the leader asked how many times, it was actually on compassionate counseling, I think it was. And he asked, how old were you when you started to help people? We all went like this big, so it's just been my nature that I had a very wise mother. My mother knew a lot, and she was never wrong about people, which was just kind of a very scary thing. But I inherited a lot of her traits and a lot of her wisdom. And I always say that things just kind of come to me. I don't know how or why, but I feel like I've been given a lot of gifts. And so I've always been a helper person. When I was in high school, I was doing counseling camp counseling for underprivileged kids, for kids with polio. And so that's just kind of been my history. And I always wanted to be a teacher. That was kind of the thing. When I was growing up, you were either a nurse or a teacher, many of the women.
Mm-hmm.
But the teaching felt like the right profession for me. And then when I got into the classroom, I hated it. I really hated it. I couldn't understand all those years I wanted to teach. Well, the truth is, I really love teaching. I just didn't like teaching science and biology. I was not a very good, um, easel kind of design maker. And a therapist and a social worker and a psychologist would walk in, and they would take the kids out and they'd start talking about their families. And I said, I think I've got the wrong piece. So I went back to school and I got my master's in social work. And I wanted to be a psychotherapist. And I always loved business. But organizational development for me felt like I couldn't really get to the source of what was really going on with somebody. And as a psychotherapist, I feel like I have permission and training to get to places that I couldn't do otherwise. And so I started my profession as a psychotherapist. My first job was working with women with eating disorders. And in my TEDx talk, I do tell my story about I would just sit and listen to these young women, and I'd go, I hear you. I don't feel you. And if I don't feel you, you're not going to do well. And so that led me into all this mind body kinds of experiences. The first one I had was at a yoga class, and I said, oh my God, that's Shavasana. If I could get those young women to do this, maybe they wouldn't need their eating disorder. Because what I learned was that all addictions, at least in my experience, are anxiety based. And they're always about feelings that you don't want to feel. And so that question, and I knew that I needed to get under the conscious mind. because everything that was happening was in the unconscious. So my whole career is really about how do I help you experience yourself differently, because the body gets triggered before the mind. The mind might trigger the experience, but the body gets triggered, and then nanoseconds later we say, oh, yeah, that. Well, we can't talk just that. And so we could talk and talk and talk, but so just kind of realizing and experiencing myself, doing a tremendous amount of work on myself as the guinea pig, I started to kind of understand kind of how we're put together. And that became very magical in helping people. So it's a short, a short piece for a pretty long career at this point. I've been doing this for 40 years, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. I think you're doing incredibly important work.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like it. It still feels like it. And the more the more masterful actually the work becomes, the more excited I am about it, because it becomes in a way more simple. That makes sense.
Ooh, hold on. This is great. Because I think with that, you're also, this is going to give us a lot to talk about. And with that, I feel like you're already shattering a huge paradigm. Because at least in my experience, there was this idea to get to a master-like level of living life. It requires incredible ongoing effort and difficulty and hardship. And so it was one of the reasons where I was like, you know what? I'm good here at this level. I don't want to go even higher because there's just more stress, more things to do. And now you're saying the more masterful you become, the more simpler life gets. And that has sparked my curiosity. Now, please elaborate. Why do you say that?
There are only so many themes in the human experience. Betrayal, abandonment, loss. And once you understand these concepts, basically, there's only so many themes where there's an infinite variation of them, Mario. So you and I may talk a lot about the same thing, but your experience is different than mine. Your history is different than mine. But when we get down to the essence, it's all the same story.
Oh.
So once you become familiar with the story and where people are going and where it's likely to take you, I would never say this to a client, but it's like a lot of times it's like, you don't even need to speak because I already know where you're going. And so that's where the intuition really kind of jumps in, because it just gives me that information, just go here, go there. And I like really complex human conditions because they challenge me. They continue to challenge me. But at the bottom line, we're all humans. We're all generated by the same desires. We all want to love and be loved. The unconscious gives us all the only information it gives us, and the only behaviors it gives us are things that have a positive intent. So even these crazy people that are doing just crazy, crazy things in the world, and killing people and horrible, in their psyche, they're doing something that has a positive intent.
Yeah.
And so my TED Talk was about befriend your inner enemy. It's not your enemy. People always talk about, the sabotage, and I do this and I do that. And it's like, yeah, but you do it for a reason. You do it for a good reason.
Yes.
And so once we just really begin to understand human nature at that level, and that's why, at this point in my career, I want to help so many more people, because sitting one-to-one is inefficient. It's just one person at a time, where I'm repeating a lot of the same things that I could repeat to a larger audience, and hopefully more people would get the same message, and then be able to apply it to themselves.
Yeah.
So
I want to talk about this philosophy of befriending your inner enemy, because I'm totally in alignment with that. Because my TEDx talk, I asked people, what if self-doubt is the best thing that ever happened to you? And position in it that way specifically because people are like, what do you mean? Self-doubt is definitely not the best thing that ever happened to me. And so it all aligns with your philosophy. And can you elaborate now, first of all, what is this idea that people have that they have some sort of an enemy within themselves? And then maybe speak a little bit into how most high performers approach this, how it affects them, and then why high performers should befriend their inner enemy.
So our mind gives us information and thoughts all the time, just over and over. I don't know. There's some statistic about how many thousands of thoughts are given up. And, we in yoga they call it samskaras. The things that just keep showing up. Well, when we're children, we have worlds around us of things that we cannot control. So we might have parents that are arguing, or we might have being pulled from schools that we want, or we may be bullied, or all kinds of things. So kids don't have necessarily that cognitive concept to be able to figure out, well, this is happening.
Yeah.
So what do kids do is they blame themselves. It must be me. If my parents are arguing, and if I were just better, if I were a little more perfect, if I were this, if I were that, then maybe this would be better. And this is just how we go. The interesting thing about children, they have magical thinking. So a lot of times they think, if I think it, it's going to be so. So I can't really hate my parents and wish they were dead, because if anything happened to them, then I would be responsible. So it's not really, couldn't be my parents, it must be me. So we grow up with these ideas of blaming ourselves, really, for a lot of the bad things that happen to us, where I do believe that children really are the only real victims. Once we reach a certain age, no matter really what your background is, you do have, in my opinion, we have the responsibility as best we can. Again, there's so many things that work against people, and they can't, but for the most part, as we grow, we can't continue to blame our parents. So we have to start to take responsibility. How did this happen? So now we have this part of us that's really mad at us. Every time we do something, and I start my talk that way, do you ever have the same issues that just show up over and over and over? You'd love to be able to change them, but you just don't know how. So the most natural thing that comes up is the way that we're programmed, from our environment, from our teachers, from the schools, from the media, so we grow up with a lot of times a lot of really crazy ideas about who we are and why we're doing things and what our motives are. But if we come down to this concept, again, of going back to childhood, all behavior has a positive intent. I may do crazy things. I may, be a drug, addict, or now drink alcohol. Well, what am I trying to cover? What is it that I don't want to feel? And so we end up with all these different behaviors that are supposed answers to things that we just don't really understand about ourselves. And there it becomes that huge gap. Here is really who I am, and this is kind of what I'm doing. We have this misalignment, and things just are not working. So if we come back to certain basic principles about human nature, again, I'm going to come back again to all that behavior has a positive intent. Why do I do this? How did I create this pattern? The other thing is that people think that we have so many patterns. Oh, I couldn't possibly begin to start to do this work, which is kind of what you were saying. Like, what's the work? I don't know. It's too much. No, you only have a few patterns that just keep showing up over and over and over and over again. And when you get down to it and you start to work with people and you get to ask them, what are the things that just get in your way? We're not going to really talk about right at this moment all the wonderful things that you do, because we don't want to mess with that. They're good. We just want to help you with those few things that just keep keeping you, those obstacles that keep you from moving forward. And once we can begin to start to name them and identify them, and then this is where the body work comes in for me. It's so I don't like to be controlled. I don't think anybody really likes to be controlled. I really don't like it. And one of the reasons I hated being in that classroom is I couldn't stand the bells that would ring that would tell me when I could go to the restroom, or could tell me when I could eat lunch, or could tell me. No, I haven't worked for anybody. Excuse me. I've worked with people for many, many years, but I haven't worked for anybody in my whole. Once I got started, that was it. I've been on my own. So I don't like to be controlled. And yet when I feel like I'm being pushed and controlled, it kind of shows up right here, right in my neck and my shoulders. Other people may have it in different places. And again, that's part of the discovery. But as soon as I feel this, I start looking around. All right, where do I feel out of control? Why is this anxiety showing up? Okay, because anxiety and control are in relationship to one another. So the less control we have, the more anxious we become. So the first question I always ask myself is where am I in control? Where am I out of control? What's happening here? And as soon as I can name it, where's it coming from? Is it coming from an external source, or am I putting it on myself? Okay, now I've got a shortcut. Oh, that person wanted me to do something, and the time is just, getting away from me, and I'm well, okay, now I can go back and problem solve. Do I really have to do that? What's my priority? So it just becomes patterns that you begin better patterns that work better for you, that you can begin to start to replace some of this older story. And through now coming into peak performance and really understanding that we're changing the neural pathways. When I started, 40 years ago, we didn't have this language, but we do now. And we have, kind of machines that can look at our brains and see what lights up and actually see that we're creating new habits, create new neural pathways. They take 30 to 40 days to start over and over and over and over and over again. So when it comes down to peak performance, so the things that I teach in my program is mastery. It's called Mastery Under Pressure. So I teach focus. When are we in focus? When are we out of focus? Laser focus is required for certain jobs, certain things. And then that really wide focus of just letting the mind kind of wander, and the brain will do a lot of the work for us, and then coming back to laser focus. So this has a lot to do with peak performance and getting into the state of flow, that there's certain neurochemicals that are given off for each part of this process, right? It's focus, and then relaxation. How to get into that deep state of relaxation. When I talked about the yoga class, it's actually initiating the relaxation response so that I can change my nervous system in an instant. Because as soon as I get triggered, okay, the sympathetic nervous system goes off, right? And then the hormones start running, and then the brain, and then most importantly for people who need their minds, and particularly in high performance, okay, your brain goes off. Okay, you can't think clearly. So how do we get that sympathetic nervous system quiet down just like that? And then I go into the thoughts, and what I call rather than positive thinking, because I a lot of times my relationship with positive, oh, I'm going to make $1 million. Oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, really? Again, that little voice right behind you, you got to be kidding. That's not really going to happen. And it won't happen. So I like to use productive thinking. Do my thoughts produce something useful for me? So as I begin to start to raise my level of awareness, how am I talking to myself? Right? And then how quickly can I change it? Can I tweak it because I know that if I could go down that path, being really mad at myself and really hating myself, I'm just going to go down this spiral.
No.
And then I'm down in the hole and I'm not solving anything. So if I can use that term that it's a lot overused now, but mindfulness, it's an ancient practice. Okay. Mindfulness is being aware in the present moment without judgment. Okay. So it's the without judgment that makes the difference. Yeah. So if I can start to, this is how I'm thinking. This is what's going on. Is this produce something useful for me? No. Okay, what do I need to do to shift it and change it? so that I can learn something from it or move forward. So, and then I work with visualization. Okay, great athletes, great performers. We talked about this about our TED Talks and your pre-performance kind of method and what I did and what other people may do, but really visualizing how I want to be, the energy that I want, just before here. Okay, I did my own meditation. How do I want to be in this podcast? How do I want to be with you? And then lastly, I work with fear. And there's two wonderful sayings that I have about fear. One is the only way past it is through it. And the other one is it's the only thing that gets smaller as you get closer. And so this is, and I do believe, I didn't make all this stuff up. I just put it together through my own lens and my own training. But the stuff is magical. It really is.
It really is.
With those
it really is
concepts, life changes. It just does.
I want to ask you, you dropped a lot of wisdom and a lot of practical insights that I think, when applied, can really help you make quantum leaps forward in your life. And, let's talk about the patterns for a moment, because I think this is a big conversation that a lot of high performers are completely unaware of. And it goes to really understand that these patterns, they shape your entire destiny. If you do not become aware of them, and you actually can consciously look at where is my life leading and how do I feel about the way where it's leading, and is this in alignment with what I truly want? And so for me, I remember very distinctively when I was younger, I was in first grade, second grade. We were playing outside. We were playing ball. I brought the ball to school, and we were playing, having fun, little kids. And then all of a sudden, one of the girls stopped the game. She picked up the ball, looked at me, and we were about, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 kids outside on the schoolyard. She screamed over, and she's like, "Mario, that's against the rules. You cannot do that." And in that moment, I was petrified. I felt so ashamed, because the entire schoolyard was looking at me while she was telling me that I made a mistake. And it was so charged, and I will never forget that, because after that incident, my life became about proving myself. And it was everywhere in my life. It was just, I had to be the best. I had to be the fastest. I had to be the best looking. I had to be the smartest, the most extravagant. I always had to find a way for me to be the best. And that just sort of became my identity. And I never really questioned it. I just thought, that's just who I am. And so it helped me to build a lot of success in societal's understanding of what success looks like. Yet what it did on the inside, it was killing me, because I ended up in chronic back pain, constant pressure that I put on myself that left me in debilitating pain pretty much 24/7. I became severely depressed, and I contemplated suicide for about 2 weeks on a daily basis. And nobody knew about this, because I was a phenomenal actor. I was like, I'm not going to show this to anybody in the world, because if I did, it would contradict this whole idea of I got to prove myself. So I cannot be vulnerable and authentic. And so it went to the point where I had a complete breakdown, and I then found Tony Robbins and Les Brown on YouTube, which turned my life around. But it was that pattern that I found so strongly, and I looked at how it was playing out in my relationships by me never truly being fully authentic and fully vulnerable, because it would require me to show a sense of weakness, which then would again contradict my idea of I got to be number one, I got to be the best, I got to prove myself. And so I worked through this pattern in many different ways, in many different modalities. And now when it comes up to say hello, I know how to respond to it. I don't fight it, not at all. I don't go like, oh, this thing again. I was like, oh, hello, ego. Hi, did you come to say hello today? I was like, what's up?
How does it show up for you? How do you know it like that quickly? How does it show up?
in relationships, when I feel a sense of intimidation, especially then, like when I hear other men talk about their successes, I can see physically they're stronger. I get this immediate sense of intimidation, and I get the sense of like I'm shrinking, and then I get this immediate sense of like, like, like I'm fighting. It's like, no, this is me, and I could hear that, and I could feel that, and I was like, hello. Sometimes I'm
Hello.
unconscious and I don't, and I go through the whole thing. But many other times I'm like, oh, while I can have a conversation, I can regulate myself. Like I deepen my exhales. Like I can, when I'm finished talking, I go and I rub my chest and I do this. And other people don't notice it; they don't pick it up. So it's not even weird. And my mantra is, I am safe. I am safe. I am safe. And I can notice my sense. And then depending on who I'm talking to, that's what you said about the only way through to face fear is through it. Often, what I've done in the past and still do today, I bring it up. I said, you know what? What's interesting? Right now, what's coming up is an old program of mine that is very intimidated when you share what you just shared. And there's a sense of me wanting to prove myself and wanting to just tell you how great of a person I am. And, I feel that we have a good enough connection for me to bring this up. And when I do this, it creates magic because the people are like, wow, who are you to even speak so openly and vulnerably? I have that too. Oh, thank you for sharing that. And so I always say, the best way to dissipate these kinds of fears, like especially shame and guilt, is to bring them into the loving light, where you are safe enough to actually do this. Because if you're not, it might cause havoc with other people. But it helped me tremendously.
Okay, so this is so beautiful, right? Because you demonstrate, right, the work. People ask me all the time, what's the work? The work is, taking the time to become aware, right? We can't do anything if we don't have that level of awareness. So we have to be very
Yeah.
kind to ourselves to allow this material really to kind of show up and not kind of respond in that same old way, right? Because if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. So why not try something
Exactly.
different? Whatever that difference is, it can only be one little tiny little degree, which is going to take you in a completely different direction. Okay.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I also want to have people to know is to have a lot of respect for that part of us that tries to make us safe. Number one. And number two, that part of us is not going to give up so easily. And that's why this work takes, that's why it's not magic. It's magical, when you have the experience and you get to the place where you are, right? But it's not magic. It's a negotiation between this child part of you. I've kept you safe. Look at all that success you have. I don't know if I could trust this new you, to do something completely different. So we have to be very kind to that part of us and have really conversations. Let me just try this. We can always go back here.
Yeah.
We know that you know your work really, really well. Give me a little space,
Yeah.
And so that's where the help comes in, and that's where having the support comes in, because this stuff is very subtle. So this is the part where we do need frequently outside people to just lovingly say, hey, let's just look over here.
Yeah.
Because the stuff, as you said, I don't always know that it's happening. It's subtle. But once we can step back enough, I can see it there. And then I can see it there. And then I can see, that's the pattern that's keeping me so stuck.
Yeah.
Right? So, again, so I say it's simple once you have the knowledge, because then it just repeats and repeats and repeats. And as soon as you know how your body just kind of does that, I mean, you did it. Your chest gets tight, and this happens, and that happens. Oh, there it is. That's that pattern. That's that program. That's that story. Okay, now I have Now I can see it. I have that level of awareness. Okay. And now I can move. Right. So
Mm.
it's a process that may be very uncomfortable in the beginning. A lot of times I say it's like taking a pair of shoes and putting them on the wrong feet, and now you're expecting me to walk. And I'm learning how to drive a car where you have to think all the time. It's the same kind of experience, but until it becomes a new habit, and then you'll turn around. I work with tennis players a lot. My husband teaches tennis, and Mastery Under Pressure started out as Tennis to the Max, where I was teaching these mental skills to tennis players, and then I lived in New York and I was teaching to athletes, not only athletes but performers and all kinds of people. But I lost my train of thought. But anyway, the stuff, as you keep practicing. My gal who said, and I've known her for a while. She's a tennis player. She's a great, great player. But anytime she would get under, she would start to compete, she would kind of fall apart and she would lose. So we had to kind of really kind of work on the story that she would tell herself about, looking at the end of the match rather than being in the match at the time, it being in the moment, and also kind of what's happening to her body. And then, so the other day she just said, God, I got out there and I competed. I was relaxed. She said, it never happened to me before. And that's the way it happens. It's just like all of a sudden you're just like, oh, that used to just kind of drive me crazy. But, now it's like, how did that happen? Well, because of all the work that you put in over and over and over and over and over again. Unconsciously, okay, things are beginning to shift, and that part of you that's holding on so tight is beginning to let go. And now you can start to be really who you are. Yeah. So, when we think about the work that we do, Mary, that you do and that I do, and that so many of us that we know that are really, really great teachers and coaches, and we have a lot of work to do because this stuff is not obvious. It's just not obvious, and it's not taught from a really, really early age.
Yeah. And to also add here, because you spoke a lot about yoga, and oftentimes in the past, I would sort of mentally compare myself to those enlightened masters and yogis. It's like, when will I ever be like that? I mean, this, they're just so in their center and so enlightened and so full of love. And I'm constantly judging myself and judging other people and, being angry. And then I also realized that it's a lot easier to live in the mountains somewhere in India, where you're sitting in a cave for 8 hours a day and meditating, compared to living in a capitalistic society where every human being is programmed to compete, to be better, and to look for what's wrong, right? Because our default programming of the mind is look for what's wrong, because it used to be the one who found out what's wrong the first is the one who survives, because the second or the third one might be eaten alive by a saber-toothed tiger, or or whatever. So what you're saying is so true, and it needs a deliberate, consistent practice to help you to get to greater levels of mastery. And I feel like, and maybe we can speak a little bit about into that as well. I feel one of the greatest challenges for high performers to put these things into action, the things that we're talking about, and to just reach way higher levels of performance in a more sustainable way, are their social networks. Because when you're going through this change, literally a part of you it goes through an experience of death, right? That's where the term ego death comes from. And with that, often the connections that this identity had. And so sometimes you may notice you come back into your office and you don't connect with the people there at all. And you're like, I'm such a terrible human being, Or you go back to your family and you sit there at the table and you're like, I don't even have anything to say here. Like, this is so not me anymore. And so a lot of people, I feel, they then stay stuck there, and they sort of say, and that maybe we bring in the people pleasers, like, oh, I just want everybody to be happy, so that they will like me. But I feel people often get stuck at that point. And I see this in organizations with leaders. I've coached many, many, many people where they are holding on to a C or B team because they want to be nice. But the company is struggling because they're not hiring A players. So can you speak a little bit into this phenomena and maybe how you go about resolving that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very real. And what you said, it happens in marriages and relationships. It happens with friends. You know, they were my drinking buddy. They were my smoking buddies. They were my cook. They were this buddy. They were that buddy. And I don't have it out now, but I did actually turned about 7-year program with a guy who it's called Integrated Kabbalistic Healing. So it's the combination of the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mystical path, and yoga and Buddhism and energy work and all this really fabulous stuff. And it was the first part of it was a 3-year training, and we would walk in every day, and there was a quote, and it talked about transformational work, and that you don't want somebody to come along who's just going to say, oh, you're just great, you know, this is really nice, because actually what we do is we slay, you know, the ego, that part of us that's you know, it's the unhealthy part of us that's just kind of holding on and always wanting to please and that kind of. And so we end up with this tremendous loss. And again, with loss comes grief. So we sort of have to go through the process of grieving this old self in a way. And so once we can sort of understand what's happening, that we're not better than these other people. We're just growing in a way that they have not decided to grow, or that they're just not there yet, or they never be there. So
I like that.
I like to put it in sort of a perspective that the highest energy is the energy of love. Right? And then underneath that, we have compassion and we have empathy. And then we kind of go down the scale where we get down to this negativity and this darkness and where people live. So it's not like I judge anybody. I just, you know, sort of automatically kind of place them in a place where are we in connection to one another? You know, and the reason that you and I just are having this great conversation is because we've done this level of work, that we can communicate at this level, right? So we have to be kind to the other people actually who haven't engaged in it, because for whatever reason. But at the same time, we really, again, want to honor ourselves for the work that we're doing and honor the people that are there. They are where they are. So number one, so we're not going to judge them, okay? But we're going to recognize that this is a metamorphosis. And what people, when they talk about transformational work, they think that they're going to turn into somebody else. No, they're not going to turn into somebody else. They're only going to turn into themselves. So it's really coming home to the self is what transformation is. Really, I've done a tremendous amount of, you know, all the psychological work, but a lot of spiritual work with a lot of really wonderful spiritual masters.
Yeah.
And so number one, we have compassion. And number two, we have to start to look at what's the cost, whether it's a personal cost or a business cost, what's the cost of holding on to this old self? You know, and again, putting it in very practical terms. You know, business people talk about money. They talk about bottom line. So you want to talk their language. Okay. What's the cost of doing this? Okay. Let's look at it. And what I like to do is let's try this on. Okay. So we're going to try on what it's like for you to stay the same. Okay. And what are the results that you're getting? Okay. Now we're going to try on what's it like for you to step into these new shoes. And you're going to feel yourself and your authenticity and your personal power. What does that feel like? Okay. And then what new skills do you have to be able to grow into in order to actually be this person? I might have to be a hard ass. I might have to let people go. Or I might have to kind of see if I can find some other places for them to be able to take their talents and so now I've got a whole bunch of other things that I might possibly do if I were to choose to actually be this person. So it's kind of the way, just kind of the way that I would probably kind of go with that level of, because what we're talking about, Mario, we're talking about resistance, right? So I had a very wise teacher who said, you think that your client is resistant. No, your client is just being who they are. You have to be the one to be a better teacher. You're the one that has to shift and change because they're going to be who they are, right? So as soon as I feel somebody's resistance to what I'm saying, the second, honestly, that I feel it, because I already know that if I keep going, or even what I'm doing is not working. It's not working. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got to come around from another creative way. And that's when I start to ask for help. I learned what one teacher said, if I knew what I was doing, if I knew what I was going to say, what would I say? And then I just wait for the answer. It's like, try this.
I like that a lot.
Let's see.
I think you're speaking into a very profound idea, which is the idea of intuition and of connecting to source, God, universe. It's all labels, essentially the same thing. But I like also how you're able to adopt. Like if you're not speaking the language of the person who is receptive to your language, you can adjust. And that is something that my family has taught me to speak, to become a masterful communicator, because I come from a family where, I was raised bilingual, German, Italian. And so my family lives in, for lack of a better term, a very simple way of life, simple way of living life, and a simple way of communicating things. And I think maybe that might be part of the Sicilian nature of how things are communicated. And so for me, often when I was younger, I didn't feel understood. And so I had to find ways to communicate more complex subjects that I was interested in into more simple language. And, just earlier today, I had a conversation with a lady, my tattoo artist, and she has a thing with her boyish friend, if you want to call it that, and anxiety. And then she saw a therapist. She said it didn't help at all. And it's like, I explained to her the whole situation in like 90 seconds. And she's like, oh, wow. Nobody has ever explained it to me in these simple terms. And I made references to like going to a workout, going to the gym. It's like, oh, it makes all sense now. I totally get it. And I explained to her judgment and resistance. And I feel like if you develop communicative skills, in my opinion, I'd be curious to hear your experience. It all starts with how you communicate with yourself. How much do you actually listen to yourself? Because I never used to listen to myself. I just sort of went for it. I was like, okay, that's the way it is. Just go for it. My thoughts is who I am. My feelings is part of me. Oh, well, that's just what it is. And then I started to listen. I was like, wait a sec, what's going on down there? And I was like, I heard all these crazy things. I was like, oh my goodness, that's coming from down there. It's like, wow, what else is in there? And so, and at some point, also to reference what you said earlier, children, as you said, they believe in magical thinking. I used to tell myself that what I think is who I am. So if I think thoughts that I would determine as crazy or bad, negative, I would feel so horrible about myself. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm thinking that. What kind of a terrible person am I? And then I learned that thoughts are really just programs, and I didn't choose to put them there. I accepted them unconsciously, but I had no conversation about that. Do you choose to believe in that? No, it just happened. And so now I learned, one rule of thumb for me is never argue with your own mind. So I don't even go there and go like, oh, but you should be, no, but you shouldn't. That's okay. You're a coach, you're a teacher. Oh, but you're also a student. No, I don't do any of that. I go into the body. And go into my body through breathing, through touch, through, taking up space until I notice my mind has quieted down. And then I reevaluate the situation. It's like, what do I do? Either I choose to proceed and embrace whatever is right here in front of me, or
Mhm.
I truly feel I'm not ready for this. I just cannot handle it in this point of time, and I'm okay with that. And I choose to go and rest and take more time for myself. There's either those two choices. So I'm curious, how do you see that?
Well, I kind of what you just demonstrated. Okay, number one is this statement that this is just who I am. People say that all the time. This is just who I am.
Mm-hmm.
No, and kind of what you've challenged within yourself. It's not who I am. It's what I've learned. It's what I've been programmed. So it's very,
Mm-hmm.
very important as a number one thing to really start to question, because what you demonstrated is this level of what we've described earlier. This is what mindfulness is. I notice in the present moment without judgment. Okay. And what you talked about is, I notice that my mind is doing this. Okay, now we're raising our level of awareness. I notice that if I say it once, I say it about 1,000,000 times in my work. Just notice. Okay. I don't want you to change anything right now. I don't want you to do. I just want you to start to notice. Okay, because now it's conscious. I've taken it out of the unconscious, and now it's conscious. I can see it right in front of me, and then I can choose. And you use those words.
Mm-hmm.
I get to choose. Okay, so being in control of your life, people think a lot of times that being in control means being in control of all these external things and external people and what they're doing and what we expect of them, and they're not following and they're not doing that, and it drives us crazy, really.
Yeah.
Okay, but being in control of your life means being at choice. I choose.
Ooh, so good.
Choose.
So good.
Right? So here's an earthquake coming. Here's a tsunami. Here's a terrible, terrible things. Okay. What are my choices? I have so little choice here. But the Man in Search of Meaning, the Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camp, right? They can control everything, but they can't control my mind.
Yes.
This is the most powerful thing that you have. Right. So that's where it's in the earthquake. I haven't gotten an earthquake equipment yet, and I live in California. Look, I've lived here for 9 years. I need to get the earthquake. I have not chosen yet to be responsible enough to get it. And now that we're talking about this, I'm going to make a commitment to myself to do it, to actually do it.
All right.
Right? Check me on it. I'm putting it off. But I do get to choose. So the way that I look at transformational work is like this. First, I think of it in 3 stages. I call it the 3 I's. So first is the insight. Right? We can't do anything without raising this level of awareness and having some level of insight into some of these patterns that we've been talking about. So I notice. Now I can pick up the patterns. I see it. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Okay, now I've got that. And the next thing is implementation, because now I'm learning new behaviors. So instead of doing that, I'm going to implement this new behavior. I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do it over and over and over. So I'm implementing new behaviors. And over time, they become integrated into my psyche. And that's when it's just like it becomes second nature. You start to feel this and you go like this, second nature. It's integrated into your system. And that's kind of the way that I kind of see this process, and to respect each part of it. Because one of the other great wisdoms that I learned a long time ago, and this gets us into so much trouble, is our expectations. Okay? I expect this of me. I expect that of me. I expect me to be perfect. Okay. And yet, I was a really, really great student, except in math. Geometry absolutely killed me because I do not need these pictures. These 3-dimensional pictures in my mind. It will always flat surface. I couldn't see it. Right? Couldn't see it. Tutors and everything. I just couldn't see it. So I might expect myself to get the same A that I'm getting in everything else. Okay, but the reality was my brain just doesn't see things like that. Okay, so now I have to get myself over here. Okay, so if this is the truth, what's the best I can do? And I really can't expect myself to see like a designer, who just kind of sees these pictures in their minds and makes these things. And I remember I did an aptitude test, and they gave me a puzzle that had no sides to it, and I was being timed. I said, "Could you just give me the worst time, please, and let me not have to do this?" I just, it's not happening. Whereas my oldest son would just see the whole thing in his mind and go click, 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 click. It would be done, right? So, and what the expectations that we have of other people and the expectations that we have of ourselves and situations. And I guarantee every time that you are upset or angry or frustrated, it's because you had an expectation that was over here and the reality is over here. Right? And in between is frustration and disappointment. So again, by having this level of awareness, okay, what was my expectation right now? Okay, just kind of like you said, living in this society, just dealing with charges that show up on my credit card that I didn't authorize, or, I mean, it's so many times in a day, your life can get railroaded into, I call it time sucks, the time, this is not what I want to be doing right now, but if I don't do it, it's going to get worse, right? So where's my expectation? My expectation is I should be or want to be doing X, Y, Z, and I'm not. Okay, I'm frustrated. So the reality is I better deal with this, and then I can move on. And this is just a very powerful thing of bringing yourself back into what's true. Yeah. So much of the stuff that we're talking about, Mario, is brilliant stuff that we would love to have everybody know because this stuff works. They say in AA, it works if you work it. This stuff works if you work it.
It really does. It really, really does. And, speaking about expectations, you have definitely exceeded my expectations for this conversation. So thank you very much. And, as we come to the end of the conversation, I do want to ask you, because I do remember that you have something that might be very interesting for anyone who's listening and who would like to dive a little deeper into Tina Greenbaum's world and benefit from the beautiful, powerful insights, tools, and transformations that you facilitate to reach even higher levels of performance. So what is it that, you want to invite our listeners and viewers into, and where can they find it?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Mario. This has just been wonderful. I love to talk shop. So this has been great. So Pressure is everything that I have. It's my book. It's right behind me. You can get it on Amazon. It's a good start to this work. I've got lots of content on YouTube, and Mastery Under Pressure actually is a 3-month program that all the things that we talked about today, I teach. And so those are the two things I think the best. Just start with the book. You can get in touch with me, Tina at Mastery Under Pressure, and find me on LinkedIn. Same thing, Tina Greenbaum. And I'd be more than delighted to help. So thank you.
Beautiful. I will be sure to add all of those links into the show notes. And I highly recommend that whoever you are, you grab the chance to connect with Tina. She's a wonderful human being. She's a living powerhouse that can provide you with the insights, shifts, tools that you need to reach the next level of performance in your life. And performance not just from a place of getting results, but also from a place of feeling whole, feeling fulfilled, feeling happy where you are in your life. Tina, it has been an absolute pleasure having you here on the show. Thank you very much. And I get this feeling that this won't be our last conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Beautiful. Alrighty, and thank you for tuning into the Zenpreneur podcast, and I will see you on the next episode.